Hi, everybody. What a powerful way to illustrate some of the really complex dilemmas when it comes to trying to be a bit more sustainable in our daily lives. And that's what I'm going to talk about, just to kind of round off our evening and then hopefully stimulate a bit of debate amongst all of us. Thinking about how we can move from the green lies to creating that global change. And I think what was illustrated really perfectly in the film was the need for the entire system to change. But I know I certainly started getting that sense of overwhelm at several different points in that film, and I'm sure I wasn't alone in that. So let's talk a little bit this evening about what we can do as individuals and then collectively as consumers, but also as citizens, to really kind of influence that change and make that happen. So my name is Sian Conway-Wood. I'm the founder of Ethical Hour, and I went on a similar journey to what we were seeing in the film there several years ago now. I was working in marketing, in finance and then in tech, but I was obviously very aware of the kind of manipulative marketing techniques that were used in a more consumer-focused environment. I was in what we call B2B, business to business, but obviously to sell us stuff. It's all the same principles. And I was very interested in what makes people buy and how we can sell to them, because that was my job, and it still is my job, but I like to think I do that in a more ethical way now. But I was your typical kind of 20-something fast fashion consumer, out buying mountains of clothes, kind of every weekend, just getting that shopping hit because there were things going on in my life that I wasn't particularly happy about with my corporate job, and just kind of caught up in that loop. And it was actually traveling to Cambodia that made me have that light bulb moment. And you can kind of see several light bulb moments in that film as well, of just actually going and getting out of your comfort zone and seeing something different and seeing the impact that your decisions are having. And I'm sure many of us will have had that again more recently with the Blue Planet 2 effect and the kind of impact of plastic. Some will have had that much earlier, some people will have come to that later, but I know for many, many people that Blue Planet 2 moment where we saw that footage was a real wake-up call. And I think these light bulb moments are really important, and it's where we go from there and how we sustain that momentum. And for me, I came back from Cambodia thinking I really want to change my habits, but I know how ingrained habits are subconsciously. And being in marketing, I can see how our consumption habits are so subconscious and so programmed in, and we are constantly manipulated. We see over 10,000 advertising messages per day. So, we're getting to the end of the day now. We will have all consumed that many advertising messages today, and we won't have even noticed less than probably a quarter of those we will have consciously noticed and taken in, but they will have influenced us. They will be influencing our purchasing decisions. And so I knew that if I was going to change my habits and become a more ethical consumer and change the way that I was shopping, I would need support to do that. So being in marketing, I took to social media and I started Ethical Hour, which began life as a Twitter chat on Monday nights, and we still have that every Monday, but grew to become a community of small businesses all around the world that really want to become more ethical and sustainable, that want to take their customers on that journey as well and change their shopping habits and do it together, but that also want to push back against the big corporations and really influence them to change and break that greenwashing. So that's what we do now, and it's just a real privilege to be able to do that work. And hopefully I'm going to share some of that with you tonight. So the British Petroleum, Beyond Petroleum, bit of marketing wizardry for you there, and just shows you how my industry is not always on the right side of history by enabling this greenwashing. They obviously are really high up there on the biggest polluters on the planet, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this stat that just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. When BP did that big rebrand, the PR agency that they paid that astronomical figure to to do that rebrand, they actually came up with the concept of carbon footprints. And the idea of your individual carbon footprint came directly as a result of a PR campaign for a big oil company. That's not to say that the idea of our individual carbon footprints is meaningless or isn't useful. It's very, very helpful to understand how much of an impact we have and what we can do to reduce, and we should all be doing that. But these companies should be doing that too. And I think that's where the problem comes in, because they are so busy pushing us into individual action. And then what happens is we start to shame each other. So we get into that cycle that you saw there, he's eating his M&Ms and she's saying, you shouldn't be eating those, you shouldn't be buying that at the supermarket. But the thing is, when you go to the supermarket, let's say you're buying some eggs. You're going to go and stand in front of the shelves of eggs, and you've got two choices. Obviously, you've got lots of different choices, but two key choices if you're going to buy eggs. Free range or not free range. Obviously, at the moment with the bird flu, there's a bit of an issue with that, but let's just put that to one side for a moment. You've got that choice, caged hens or free range hens. And you have to make that choice. And if you go for the free range, you're probably going to pay a little bit more. But the supermarket selling you those eggs makes profit regardless of what you choose. Why should that have to be your choice? And ultimately, regardless of which one you choose, your life doesn't get any better, it doesn't get any worse. You maybe feel good that you've made the free range choice if you can afford that. If you can't afford it, or you haven't done that, or it's not an option, maybe you feel a little bit guilty. But fundamentally, there's no massive impact on your life, and the supermarket profits either way. So realistically, the supermarkets should be the one to change. So what I wanted to do tonight is just dig into some of these marketing techniques that companies are using. And there's a really useful formula for this, because as you saw when they were going around the supermarket, very quickly becomes overwhelming. It becomes difficult to make those decisions. And it just gets to the point where you don't know where to turn and you have to prioritize different issues. So do I want to prioritize fair trade, but the fair trade bananas come wrapped in plastic? Do I want to prioritize organic, but the organic produce comes from further away? And we have to make those decisions, and the companies continue to profit. We obviously can make an impact when we go shopping, and we can make decisions that do have a ripple effect up the value chain, and that is a really good starting point. And we do see, as they highlighted in the film, shopping in a better way isn't enough. We need to reduce how much we are shopping. But in my experience, actually engaging with our shopping decisions, starting to question what we're buying, why we're buying it, how it's been sold to us, and what impact it's having is the starting point on this journey. And some of you may already be there, you may be consuming a lot less, you may have changed a lot of your habits, some of you might be at the very beginning. The real key to this is that we don't turn on each other and start virtue signaling about who's doing it better or who's the more eco-consumer. Consumption itself is flawed. That model fundamentally needs to change, but changing the system becomes really overwhelming and really daunting. As individuals, if we start to question our shopping habits, it's the step on the journey. And we can do that by understanding how these companies are keeping us trapped in that consumption cycle. In fashion, for example, marketing in fashion is very, very manipulative. It plays on your insecurities about how you look, and that feeds into social acceptance and a lot of our really deep-rooted beliefs about ourselves. And fashion is a really interesting one. If you speak to even kind of eco-consumers that are very far along on their journey, not necessarily kind of activist consumers, but a couple of steps back from that have changed a lot of other habits in their life cycle. If you talk to them about whether they buy sustainable fashion or not, a lot of consumers will say that they don't buy sustainable fashion because they see that as their reward for being good in other areas. So it's a really deep-rooted consumption habit. And to break those habits, we need to understand those messages we're receiving and how we're being sold to. There's a marketing agency that were called TerraChoice, they're now called UL, they got bought out, but they came up with the 7 sins of greenwashing. And these are really, really handy. They're not the only ways that greenwashing happens, and greenwashing can be really complex, but it's really handy to get to know these, and the more you get to know them, the more you spot them out there in the wild, and it does start to influence your purchasing decisions. So the first one is the hidden trade-off, labeling a product as environmentally friendly based on a really narrow set of attributes, where other attributes not addressed might have had a bigger impact on the eco-friendliness of the product overall. So for example, Save the Ocean t-shirts, if they're made from synthetic fabrics like polyester, every time you wash them, they're releasing microfibers into your water supply, which obviously is making its way to the ocean. So your Save the Ocean slogan t-shirt that's donated 50p to an ocean charity actually might be doing more harm to the ocean every single time you wash it. That's a hidden trade-off. Number 2, no proof. We've probably all seen this one. My biggest bugbear is things that claim to be 100% eco or 100% sustainable, because that is fundamentally not possible. If that product exists, it has had some negative impact somewhere in the value chain. So making claims about the sustainability of products with no accessible support information or third-party certification. We'll talk a little bit about third-party certifications later on, because I know that they were flagged as an issue in the documentary, and I have thoughts about that, but we'll talk about that later on. But as we saw, most of these claims are unregulated, or they're regulated in certain industries and not in others. So for example, for food to be organic, I think it's 95 or 99% of the ingredients in that food have to be certified organic. But in fashion, to come back to my favorite example, a dress or a t-shirt can call itself organic regardless of how much of the percentage of that fabric is organic. So it could be 5% organic cotton, 95% not organic cotton, and still label itself as organic. So because there is not that regulation, the companies can slap these labels on and make us think that they're more eco than they really are. Vagueness, so the idea of sustainability as a whole, it probably means different things to different people, it means different things in different contexts, it's very, very vague. And my favourite example of this one is the term natural, because arsenic is a natural material, but I don't want it in my skincare. Worshipping false labels. So this is where companies imply that there is a third-party endorsement. The big one with this one that the supermarkets are really guilty of is developing their own fair trade certifications and moving away from the actual fair trade mark. You'll see this a lot with tea and coffee. There is a well-known, very popular chocolate brand that recently did this themselves and said, we're going to ditch fair trade and we're going to start doing our own. And they claimed that it was better and that actually they were able to look at more ethical issues and more sustainable issues. But if they're doing their own schemes, there's nobody marking their homework and checking that they are actually doing what they're saying. So that's part of the problem that we were seeing there around palm oil, is that actually they can tell us anything at that point because nobody is regulating it. Irrelevance, so just telling us things that are completely meaningless, but because we're in a rush, we're busy, we're just absorbing this information and moving on, we're making subconscious assumptions, we're not actually questioning the information that we're being given. So for example, a lot of skincare products used to have tiny, tiny bits of plastic in called microbeads, which were supposedly good for exfoliating your skin. It's now, thankfully, illegal in the UK to have those in skincare, but you might still see products on the shelves that claim to be microbead free. It's completely meaningless in this country because by law, everything is microbead free. Lesser of two evils, so claiming to be more environmentally friendly than other products in the same category. One of the budget airlines got in trouble with this because they ran a big advertising campaign saying that they were much less emitting much less emissions per flight, and it turned out it was per passenger. They'd worked out the total amount of emissions, divided it by the number of people on the plane, and actually they could just fit more people on their plane. So it was by the amount of people on the plane, and they got fined by the Advertising Standards Agency. So we are starting to see slightly more regulation, slightly more kind of challenging coming through on trading standards, but legislation is very, very slow moving. And what has happened in recent years is the demand from consumers has grown so much that the companies are just trying to cash in, as we've seen in the documentary, and the regulation isn't there to rein them in. And because the demand has grown from consumers, but it's so confusing when you get out there and you see all this greenwashing and you don't really know what is eco and what's not, it's actually easier for them just to kind of pull the wool over our eyes, keep telling us these lies, and just wait and keep making profit until they have to change. So that's why it's really, really important that we act as citizens and we push for that legislation, we push for these third-party certifications, and we push back as consumers to these brands as well and demand better from them. And just outright lying. So she alluded to it in the film there, but the VW scandal where they were just fixing the emissions ratings on those cars. It is illegal to lie in advertising, but we've all seen companies do it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of that going around in the sustainability space at the moment. And it can be really, really hard to know what's right and what's not. And that is one of the most dangerous things about greenwashing. And that's where professionally with my marketing hat on, I get so angry about this actually, because every time a company greenwashes you, if you've gone out of your way to research that product, to spend more money on it and to put your trust in that brand, and then you find out that it's not as eco-friendly, you're going to doubt the next time, and you're probably just going to revert back to the safer option, which is the less ethical, less sustainable, cheaper option, more convenient option, because why bother if they're all lying to us anyway? And it stops people from engaging, it stops them from demanding change, and it stops that momentum that we really desperately need. So why is it so hard to take action on this stuff as individuals? I think so many of these barriers were highlighted really nicely in the film. I just want to run through them to really acknowledge them, because I think sometimes we do feel that pressure so much on us as individuals that it's the weight of the world on our shoulders to demand change and push back. And actually, when you're faced with a global system and global supply chains, it's really hard to do. So this idea that we don't have time, it takes time to research the products that we're buying, it takes time to campaign, it takes time to learn about all of this stuff, and we're busy, we've got 3-second attention spans on our devices, we're absorbing all of this information. We need to push back and actually demand that this information is given to us in a much clearer way. And that's starting to filter through now with advertising standards, with legislation, with the action that's happening. And my advice to people here is always to just think about where you want to start. Unfortunately, it does involve making some compromises and facing some ethical dilemmas. But if you can narrow down to one issue that you want to personally tackle, or one set of values that are really, really important to you when you shop, you can save yourself a lot of time because you will learn this stuff. You could see when she was looking at the palm oil labels, she knew exactly what to look for. There are hundreds of different terms for palm oil, and it is really hard to actually know whether that's in a product or not. It's pretty much guaranteed that it is going to be in a product, as we've seen the stats in the film, but to actually look for it takes a lot of time. But if that's the issue that you want to tackle, you will learn how to do that, and you will save some of that time as you get better and better at this. It's not convenient. So 48% of consumers said that although they know that they should care about the environment, convenience is still the driving factor behind their purchasing decisions. And this is because we're so time poor. We rely on supermarkets, we rely on convenience food, we rely on eating out. That's how our lifestyles are. So we should be questioning that, and we should be thinking about how we can adapt our lifestyles. But we have to work within the parameters that we're in and be realistic about that. So it's looking at ways that you can make eco-action more convenient for you. And that will look different for everybody, but that's a really good kind of reflection point to come at this from and say, right, this is the issue that I want to tackle. And you can even break that down month by month and maybe take one issue every month, or, you know, however that's going to work for you. And then think, what can I do to make this slightly more convenient every time I shop? Overwhelm. So I have to admit that palm oil is one of those things that I just get complete overwhelm about, and it breaks my heart to see the footage. And I've been out to regions of the world where they grow palm oil, and I've seen those plantations, and I've done work in the rainforest, and I know how precious that environment is. And just like he said, you know, you come home and you eat your chocolate and you don't think about it. That is intentional. We are so disconnected from the supply chains of where all of our stuff comes from on purpose so that we don't engage with this stuff. And it is overwhelming because it is big issues, it's global supply chains, it's big corporations. We have to take the ownership of that and break it down for ourselves. And there will be some issues that just feel too overwhelming to you. And I know that palm oil is one of mine. Every time I see something like that, I think, right, that's the next one I'm going to tackle. And I just haven't got there yet. And I think sometimes we have to just give ourselves a little bit of a break and say, do you know what? That is okay. I'm still learning about it. I'm still understanding. I'm understanding what my barriers are. And these are the areas that I'm going to focus on. But I'm also going to keep an eye on who's doing work in the palm oil space, what conversations are happening, and start to think about how I can get involved in that at a later date. If you go really hard on this at the beginning, it's really easy to burn out and fill yourself with eco-anxiety and disengage. So it's okay to acknowledge that overwhelm and to work within those parameters. Negative stereotypes. This is an interesting one because there are lots of different negative stereotypes in this space. Possibly the most famous one, if you like, is this idea that everybody in this space is a tree-hugging hippie. I'm actually a little bit okay with that. That doesn't bother me too much. But, you know, some people might be really put off by being thought of like that. There's also a subconscious bias, and psychologists have actually tested this, that eco-friendly products are not as good. Obviously, sometimes that is true, doesn't come from nowhere, but a lot of the time that is not true, but it's a subconscious bias that we hold. So a lot of companies find that actually they really struggle to sell their eco-friendly options because people think of them as not good quality, and then they have to build the social proof in and things to combat that. But it's worth, if you are finding that you're looking at products and you're thinking about your options and that's coming up for you and you're thinking, oh, it's not going to be as good, it's worth just digging into why you think that, because it might just be a subconscious bias. There's also obviously the stereotype that it costs more. And hopefully I've put my slides in the right order, and cost is the next barrier. We do have to acknowledge this. Eco-friendly, ethical, sustainable products do cost more. The initial investment is more, but actually that is because everything else we buy is too cheap. And I'm aware there's a lot of privilege in saying that, because actually, you know, not everybody can afford to shop ethically. There is a privilege in being able to shop ethically, to have the time to do that, to have the money to do that, to invest up front. But this is where the other areas come in. So this is where campaigning for that change comes in and tackling it at a system level, but also addressing our buying behaviour. Because fundamentally, we should not be consuming sustainable products at the same rate that we are consuming, I say we, not everybody here will be, but at the rate that the majority of people are consuming things like fast fashion. It's not going to be in any way affordable or sustainable for the planet to just shift fast fashion consumption to garments that are made from eco-friendly materials or made in a slightly more ethical way. And actually, there's a really good model called the hierarchy of needs, building on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that starts with reducing, reusing, and actually buying new is the very bottom option. It should be the last thing we're considering. And we're really programmed to think as individuals, to think as consumers, and to think of buying new as our first option, because it's so easy to do. I realised, having fairly recently had a baby, that we'd slipped into some bad habits at home that we'd really worked on not doing. A certain retailer that are named after the rainforest that are quite well known for not paying their tax. We'd started using them a lot more, and we'd really weaned ourselves off of that. But during the pandemic and having the baby, it just crept back in. And I realized I had the app on my phone. And so it was really, really easy to buy, and things would just appear the next day, and all my payment details were saved. So it was one-click ordering and dead easy to do. And I took that, I had a tracker app on my phone looking at how much I was spending that was linked to my bank account. And I took that shopping app off of my phone and then compared month on month how much my spend had decreased. And it was drastic. And it just made me realize that we were getting deliveries every other day, that actually as soon as I took that up off my phone and I started to put my good habits back in place of thinking before I bought something and questioning whether I really need it and getting out of that, oh, it's so convenient and I can just press it and it'll be here the next day. That was never getting me to stop and think, do I really need that? Or is there another way we can get that thing? Can we borrow it from someone? Can we go to the library to get that book? Can we do something else other than buy it? That was just the go-to because it was really convenient. And just getting out of that habit really, really reduced my level of consumption. So there's some really simple little tricks you can do, like taking the apps off your phone, unsubscribing from newsletters, all of those kind of things that are just designed to get you when you're busy and you're not thinking and you're just ready to spend. And I think the biggest barrier is this idea that I'm too small to make a difference. And I just always like to remind people that if we all thought like that, nothing would ever change. But what if we all thought the opposite? What if we all thought, actually, I am just one person, but I can change something. And I'm going to change something today, and I'm going to change something tomorrow, and I'm going to change something the day after that. And when you look back in 2, 3, 5, 10 years' time, so much is going to have changed from you doing that. And it's the ripple effect of you telling someone else, telling someone else, telling someone else. That's how we will create this change together. So a few quick things that you can do. Call out greenwashing when you see it. Challenging brands is a really, really powerful thing to do. And they have to stop and listen to us. And the more of us that do it, the more they will start to change. I debated about putting this one in, and having seen the film, it did make me wonder again about looking for the labels when you shop, because fundamentally the labelling systems are also flawed and need to change. And a really good example of that recently was the B Corp certification, which is designed to give a holistic view of the ethical and sustainable performance of a company. And a few weeks ago, one of Nestlé's brands was certified as a B Corp. And Nestlé kind of believe that we don't have the right to water, and that is something that people should pay for. So I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the baby milk scandals and things surrounding Nestlé as well, just one of the world's biggest polluters, but one of their sub-brands has been certified because they've been able to tick all of the boxes to say that they meet those credentials, and the certification doesn't look at the ownership structure, so it doesn't go up that value chain enough. Now, Nestlé will probably never change their ways while they can make a profit. There has been boycotts, there has been petitions, there has been consumer action for years, and they do not care. But B Corp will care. If we all start kicking up a fuss and saying, why have you certified Nestlé? And if we start going to the genuinely good brands in the B Corp movement and saying, hey, you've worked really hard for your certification and your chain is completely clean and you are ethical. Are you happy about Nestlé being certified? Because they're saying that Nestlé are the same as you and are as good as you. That's where we can have an impact. So sometimes it's about thinking outside the box and not necessarily going directly to the brand, maybe not going directly to your local politician if they're not someone that is fond of taking action when their constituents write to them, but there's always somebody else that we can talk to. And a really good example of this is in our finances. All of these companies, to grow and to make a profit and to do all the things they're doing, all of that deforestation that we saw is funded by someone. And actually, a lot of those funds come from things like our pensions and our bank accounts and where we put our money. So it's not always necessarily exactly who you are directly spending your money with as a consumer, but it might be who you're investing with. And actually, your pension fund might be able to be moved to a green fund, or you might be able to speak to the company that you work for about enabling access to a green fund. And these are ways that we can all have a much bigger difference in less time, in a more convenient way, because that isn't about every single time you make a purchasing decision in the supermarket on a Friday night when you're exhausted and the thought of going around the supermarket is a nightmare anyway, let alone standing there and reading all the labels. That's really overwhelming and it's not practical to do. But actually just setting aside one Saturday afternoon for a couple of hours to move your ISA or move your pension pot or move your bank account, that's much, much easier to do. And then every single time you pay into that, you know that it's not funding the things that you don't believe in. Again, another really practical one is just taking that pause before you buy something. Don't add it to your cart, just put it out of your mind for 24 hours and then see if you still want that thing, because you will probably have completely forgotten about it and it was probably just a piece of advertising that got to you in a moment of weakness and made you think that you want that thing. And push back to brands on social media. If you do it in a public forum like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, they are going to feel more pressure to respond. And again, the more of us that ask these questions, the more of us that push back, they're going to have to give us that evidence. So final kind of thing to share with you is just some really basic questions that you can start asking, because it can be really complicated to know where to start with this stuff. And these are some of the things that we can ask that really put them in the position where they can't just lie to us. They have to give us tangible evidence for what they're doing. So how are you actively working to reduce your carbon footprint? Most of the big corporations are relying on offsetting. There is a place for offsetting. It's a very hotly debated topic at the moment. It can't be our only solution. We have to focus on reduction first. So what are you actively doing to reduce? And if they come back and their answer is all about offsets, that's where you can push them further. What responsibility are you taking for your products at the end of their life? So Coca-Cola, biggest plastic production company on the planet, one of the biggest polluters. We saw them there saying, sustainability is so important to us. When they were asked about plastic a couple of years ago, they said, we're always going to make plastic because people are always going to buy it. And then when you buy a bottle of Coke, it's got all over it, please recycle me. And it drives me mad. There's things like compostable plastics and compostable bags. And then when you dig into that, you can't put it in your home compost. And there are only 6 industrial composting facilities in this whole country. So if you don't live in an area where you have access to industrial composting, you are the one that has to send that to landfill and feel guilty about it. That CEO doesn't feel guilty about that. That's not keeping him up at night because he's just passing that all down to us. So what responsibility are they taking for the end of life of this product? And that was one of the really powerful things we saw in the war on plastic, where everybody started sending the plastic back to the companies that produce it. They suddenly start to wake up and care a little bit more because the problem is on their hands. And can you provide evidence for your environmental claims? So much of it just comes back to providing that data. And actually what you'll find is that there are marketeers like me in the old days sitting there pumping out these claims saying, yeah, this is that and this is that. We don't sit and think about the evidence because we're not sustainability experts. So we will proudly say, this bag is made from potatoes because it's got a little bit of some sort of potato starch in there. And we won't think what percentage of that is potatoes. So unless somebody asks us, the marketers are usually, the person managing the social media account basically is usually the first point of contact in that organisation to the public to understand what issues they care about, what evidence they want, and they will go away and ask those questions because they're under pressure to reply to you. And actually what might happen is they go into that organisation, ask that question, and the people around the boardroom go, Nobody's ever asked that before. Maybe we should go and find that out, and then the change will start to happen. There's always going to be companies that will never change until the legislation forces them to, but actually there are so many companies that are seeing this as such a big movement now. They want to get in on it, they want to do their bit, they want to change, and we need to tell them what we want to see and what areas we want them to focus on, because they're scared of losing their customer base. And they're motivated by profit, but they do genuinely want to embed it because we want them to. So the more we push back, the more we question, the more we ask for evidence, the more that ripple effect happens and the change starts to come through those supply chains. Thank you. That's it from me. We will open up to debate and questions, and you're free to share your thoughts as well. Do join the Ethical Hour conversation if this is the kind of stuff that you're interested in. We tweet every Monday night at 8 p.m. on Twitter using the hashtag Ethical Hour. We're a very welcoming bunch. We don't do sustainability shame. And if you have questions about this kind of stuff, it's a really good place to come and start to learn a bit more. And I do have a book about these issues as well. So shameless plug, it is available from some independent bookshops, not the one named after the rainforest that don't pay their tax. And if it's not in your library, please ask them to stock it. Thank you.